I'm Justin Laidlaw.
And I'm Chris Vitiello.
And this is Sights on the City with Clarion Content. Today we're talking with Councilman Eddie Davis.
And he actually appears in some of those episodes too.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic fact.
Yeah.
Another Durham connection.
That's
Excellent. Well, we're here at Clarion Content talking with Councilman Eddie Davis, Justin Laidlaw. I'm Chris Vitiello. We're trying to talk to sort of all sorts of council people and candidates for city council at this sort of moment in Durham history. Where we have a lot of change going on very quickly, and to a lot of people sort of on the street, it's change that's exciting, incomprehensible, troubling, all in the same moment.
Sure.
And we'd just love to sort of talk a little bit about this moment in Durham and what you're working on. One of the things that I've been really interested in is how so much change is happening inside the downtown area. And I look east and I see change stopping at almost like a line right in the road, and I'm wondering about what's going on in East Durham, what kind of change is going on that maybe the rest of the city isn't hearing about, and what kind of vision is there on the council for East Durham going forward?
Well, people are hearing about it. They're very proud of the change, the renaissance that seems to be happening here in this portion of town. But folks are really, really cognizant of the fact that that change that you say does have parameters. Not that anyone is trying to purposely keep change and growth and revitalization out of other communities, but we've got to do some things to replicate what has happened here. We're at a crossroads. Durham has had a wonderful, vibrant history, particularly in the African American community when you go down the Fayetteville Street corridor, the old Hayti area. And much of the change that we've seen here in this downtown area has not moved down across the expressway. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do right now, to come up with ways that can invite people who are interested in business, commerce, affordable housing in those areas that can make the revitalization that we've seen here in downtown extend out to other portions of the city. The Fayetteville Street corridor is one, East Durham is another one. The West End seems to be having a revitalization to some degree with the co-op grocery store there and some of the other kinds of things. So we're working on trying to make sure that we can indeed have the conversations that would lead to a much fuller revitalization of the city of Durham.
How does if you don't mind me,
Go ahead.
cutting in, the University Central, that's right there on Fayetteville
That's
Street
right.
in that corridor, how can they play a role in this revitalization, this renaissance that's happening, whether it's from the students, from the administration, from the alumni? How can they be more of a presence? Duke is and has certainly been a presence in Durham, but how can Central enter that conversation to help move some of this progress?
Well, being a state institution, they are confined by the lack of a big budget and other kind of things from being able to really be the player that we all want them to be. But there are lots of people at the university who are trying to make sure that there is more of a revitalization, more opportunities for students to be able to spend the money that they have in their own community while they're here. Being able to not just board a bus to go downtown or go out to the mall and those kind of things. So there are many discussions that are going on from the alumni, from the residents around the area and other places. The problem in terms of just getting to the campus poses some challenges. Lots of people think that there can be some sprucing up of the neighborhood down Fayetteville Street, down Austin Avenue as you come into the university. But North Carolina Central is a key player in what we need to do for the revitalization there. They are the ones that would be the biggest recipient of a bustling kind of commercial and entertainment area that would occupy many of the dollars and the interest of their students. So people really want to do some things, and we're hoping that that can be realized as we move down the road.
If a student wanted to figure out how to get more involved, what could they do? You know, students, whether they have the money, they have the ambition, they have the energy to want to get involved in their community, but may not know what direction to aim that ambition. So how could they become more involved in their community to help?
Well, it's a wonderful question, and a couple of things. One is that we have been talking, and North Carolina Central is in Ward 2, although for the City Council, it really doesn't matter where you are. All 7 of the City Council members really are voted upon by all of the citizens and thus represent all the people. So it's not a true ward system like we get when you look at congressional districts and those kind of things. So we all are trying to represent it. But since it is in Ward 2, which I represent, residentially, at least, I've taken a great interest in trying to have regular dialogues with the students on the campus, and I've been working with the Student Affairs Department to see if we can have those kinds of conversations about what they see as their role as residents here in Durham, and how can we as a city make things more convenient for them, or more other kinds of amenities that they might want to see. They have things on the campus, but we want to make sure that they are able to take advantage of the campus activities as well as the commercial activities that surround them. The other thing that I'm very interested in, you know, they have a wonderful school of business there at North Carolina Central, and what I'm hoping that we might be able to do down the road is to create a living kind of work environment where students who are studying the theory of business might be able to also put together some practical kinds of business applications. What would be great, I think, is that each year if we could have some kind of business opportunity that the students here at North Carolina Central would be able to put together in the incubator stage and then the realization stage, much like what we see at American Tobacco Underground.
And they have an office there, Central does. They have an entrepreneurship office there.
So we need to expand that and to make sure that the business opportunities that could be realized there would be something that could be done on an annual basis. I just think that young entrepreneurship, particularly in a predominantly minority setting, would be a wonderful blueprint for the older communities, and we can do some things there on the university campus.
And on a national scale.
On a national and international scale, yeah.
It seems like schools that have entrepreneurship programs, and it's like I know a little bit about entrepreneurship at NC State and the sort of fledgling creative entrepreneurship program at Duke that is not too many years old, I don't know, maybe less than 5 years old, I think. There's sort of students get educated on how to start something, and then they get their degree, step off campus, and it's like there are certain resources that they just no longer have at their disposal. I mean, one obviously is money, you know, but you have a degree, and with a degree you can maybe get at money through a bank or something like that. What are some of the, I mean, just like dreaming for a moment, what are some of the sort of elements of that cocktail that would help graduating entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs in the Durham area get a project up and running, get a business up and running here, as opposed to leaving here and going to, you know, a larger city, for instance?
Well, I think that process is something that we can grow right here in Durham, and particularly with North Carolina Central and with Duke and with students over at Durham Tech also. We ought to be able to give them the kind of skills and skill sets that would allow them to be able to practice that while they're in school, and then to be able to be ready for the venture capital kinds of situations that would make these business opportunities thrive. So I think that those are wonderful kinds of blueprints and game plans that we ought to be put together. And Durham has always bragged about the fact that it has a wonderful entrepreneurial African American community with North Carolina Mutual, with Mechanics and Farmers Bank, with people who had the independence that may not exist in other parts of North Carolina. We ought to be able to get them to utilize that business community to try to make sure that we can help them to grow the kinds of business ideas that they have. If the light bulb can go off in their heads, we ought to be there to try to support them as they move along. And if you expand it to Duke, there are wonderful ways that you can take advantage of the legacy that we have here in Durham and to be able to grow upon it. We talked earlier about Crossroads and the wonderful history that we've had, where we are now, but more importantly, where we can go. So I'm really excited about the possibilities of the kinds of ventures that we can involve our young people and gray-haired people in the process also. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to pivot a little bit. Chris, I know you wanted to talk about development, and within the realm of development with regards to business, one thing that helps businesses grow is real estate opportunities, places where whether it's food or retail, space that if someone had an idea that they felt like they could bring that idea and afford the opportunity to get into some of these spaces, whether it's downtown or elsewhere. But it doesn't seem like at the moment Durham has too much real estate opportunity for small business. And we're kind of, with growth comes some pitfalls for small business, and that seems to be one of them. How do we help, bring attention to the city, but then also foster the small business community with regards to development here in town?
Well, you're exactly right. We seem to be not catering to, but we certainly have taken advantage of the opportunities and the proposals that have been put forth by large-scale developments that have come many times from outside of North Carolina. And that's great. But we also ought to be able to come up with some ways where we can actually nurture some of the people who have good ideas about small businesses. And we ought to be able to see if we can deal with trying to find the capital that young people and other people need to try to develop these businesses. I think there are some small commercial ventures that might be able to be dealt with in some of the less thriving areas right now that would give them the opportunity to try to do some of that work that would make Durham proud of all of its communities in terms of the opportunities. The mayor has put forth the poverty reduction initiative, and we certainly are trying to work there. But one of the best ways to reduce poverty is to try to put people in positions where they can make more money, to be able to put together business opportunities for people to come together so that they can thrive themselves. And the other thing that I'm very interested in is the business opportunities for people who have made mistakes with their early lives and who are looking for second chances, being able to, if they can't get a job because people look at their record and make some assumptions about where they were and think maybe they might follow in those footsteps. If people really are trying to change their life patterns, maybe business is the way that they can go. If they can't get into working for someone else, maybe you can put together a plan to work for yourselves. And in doing so, being able to provide a wonderful service to the communities around Durham.
I know you've been in Durham since 1980. I've been in Durham since 1994, and we both remember downtown when it was a ghost town. When I moved here, I mean, I know that like 70%, and that might even be a low number, of downtown was unoccupied. And then I remember, there were sort of iterative attempts to try to get stuff going, but one of the huge impediments was that building owners were just owning these buildings because it was cheap to own them,
right.
and they could just wait for something to happen, and hopefully then they could sell it. It was just an investment. They had no intention to develop it. And I remember that there was a property revaluation that really kind of helped spur a lot of these building owners. Suddenly they were like, I don't want to pay taxes on this anymore because the value has gone up. I want to move this property, and developers could then come in and make something happen. We're on the verge of another revaluation in Durham, 2016.
That's right.
It's happening. Does the city look at that as a way of looking at underdeveloped, undeveloped, low occupancy, high abandoned building parts of town as a way of sort of spurring those properties back into play, back into life?
Well, we certainly are involved with it, although that's mostly the bailiwick of the county commissioners.
Okay.
Because the county deals with the tax issue, and they collect the taxes that people pay for the city. But that point you're making is a very, very valuable one, and it needs to be the kind of collective conversation with the county commissioners and the city council and the broader community to see if there cannot be a way that we can do just what you're talking about, seeing if there are ways that we can spur the kind of development that we want to see here in downtown and also in other parts of the city. Here again, that's the same kind of issue. It presents itself down that Fayetteville Street corridor. Lots of the people who own the houses that we see boarded up are waiting to cash in from North Carolina Central along the way. And what we're hoping is that we can maybe convince them to do some things to try to make those buildings a little more attractive, to try to spur the commercial as well as the residential growth that we want to see in a way that would make it attractive and conducive to the kinds of business opportunities that we've been talking about. I just see such wonderful opportunities for the spur that's come from downtown to move out almost like an octopus in lots of different ways, so that we can take advantage of the growth that Durham needs.
That freeway is just awful, isn't it? I mean, we have some of these sort of geographic and architectural impediments. We got the freeway that just cuts off that corridor from downtown.
Sure.
The train tracks. I know there's been conversation about what to do about the train tracks through downtown. Although people seem to be walking across them to get to DPAC in great numbers. And then we have sort of. There's been a lot of talk recently about the police station relocation and the health building along Main Street between downtown and the Golden Belt District. And although that's only recently been sort of renamed the Golden Belt District, how are these changes that like drop in the city's lap, or are these changes that have a lot of discussion in council, among the council people about just what kinds of effects just the city layout, just the fabric of life in the city have in terms of isolating areas and connecting areas?
Well, we've had a great deal of discussion, particularly around the police station, because people talked about how we had this district. If you look at the big social services building and then the police the location right down the street from that, we have this long pathway of area where there's not much things other than going to those governmental services area. Golden Belt is a little bit different down the road, but we need to have the buildings, hopefully we'll be able to have some commercial ventures along the way that can come in and intercept some of the governmental buildings along the way. What we really need is to really thrive is to have kind of combinations of governmental buildings and commercial buildings and residential buildings, so that we end up having more neighborhoods that can thrive, that the people can live there, they can shop there, they can even deal with governmental services along the way. And that's something that we have not, during my term on the council, necessarily had the kind of integrated conversation with the county commissioners as to how that is happening. Now, lots of things may happen that I'm not aware of, but I don't think that we see the ultimate result that I would like to see along the way when it comes to those kinds of things. Yeah.
Well, and I'm sort of speaking to the viewers of this. I mean, what can citizens do to be a part of that conversation? I mean, certainly, I mean, Justin and I know that we end up having these conversations walking down the street, you know, sitting at a restaurant table or something. It's just like several a day, just about, gosh, I wish this was happening and this should happen. And there's a lot of, it seems like a lot of energy just among citizens, but we don't always know how to activate that. What person in a position of authority we need to interact with to talk about ideas and to get something happening.
Well,
in
I
the
think
world.
that's the role of your elected leaders, and I think we are moving toward trying to have more conversations about people. Not always conversations that deal with problems necessarily, like we've had recently about police and community relations, and that's certainly something that ought to be ongoing. But we ought to have continuing conversations that will allow for citizens to talk to elected officials and to do some long-range planning to look at how we can make this a much more important city in the minds of the people who actually live here. The conversations that we have among small groups of people is a good process, but we need to have large-scale kinds of discussion of issues, sometimes disagreements as to how we're going to deal with things. But we ought to be having many more conversations about how Durham will look 50 years down the road. And people say 50 years, that's a long time, but it can happen real quickly. There are a lot of people in Durham right now who remember the 60s. We were talking earlier about clubs and other kinds of nightlife activities. Lots of people remember those things, and they'll remember what Durham was like in 2015 when we look back over at down the road. So we've got some work to do to try to make this the kind of thriving community we all want it to be. So we've got to have more conversations among people, and more importantly, among people who might not normally talk to each other. We still are divided by race and class and gender and those kind of things, but we ought to be able to bridge those gaps here so that we don't end up in our conversations having the same kind of barriers that you just talked about in terms of the physical features of the city. So there ought not be a dividing line like the expressway when it comes to our conversation. So we got more to do.
How would, along those lines, how do we get sort of ahead of some of the issues that we're having, as opposed to being reactive, which I think a lot of citizens feel like that's their only option? How can we be more proactive in terms of conversations that we're having about development, crime, education, any of the concerns that we might have?
Well, I think here again, it just needs to be a purposeful kind of setting that we create. We've had some conversations recently about police and community. We have another one coming up about education, another one about second chances. But we also ought to be able to, once we have these conversations, engage in smaller conversations and to have people to write about. The Clarion content had a wonderful critique of the conversation that we had. And that kind of thing, people who weren't able to be at the event might have been able to read about it in your publication. So I just see so many ways that we can just capitalize on the kind of energy that comes from people of all walks of life who can see Durham and really try to work together to make it become the kind of community that we all want it to be. And to go back to your point, not just wait until there's a crisis. Let's be proactive rather than reactive. One of the reasons that we had this first conversation, because we saw what had gone on in Ferguson, we saw what had gone on in Baltimore, we were anticipating what might happen in Charlotte, and to be able to have the kind of conversations now rather than waiting until something happens that we don't want to see happen and then try to hurriedly come together to try to talk about things that we should have been talking about all the time. So that's the kind of vision that I'm hoping that we can develop for the city.
Conversation is the key, obviously. And this has been a great conversation. Councilman Eddie Davis, thank you so much for talking with Justin Laidlaw, Chris Vitiello on Clarion content and on sites on the city.
Well, thank you so much. I look forward to having continued conversation with you all also.
Excellent.